Welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in today, because we're looking at one of the most incredible, almost unbelievable psychological journeys ever recorded in human history. We're talking about the profound evolution of Emperor Ashoka. We're going to trace this massive, sweeping narrative, from his early days as this utterly formidable conqueror, all the way to his unexpected role as a devoted advocate for peace. It's a historical epic for sure, but at its core, it's a deeply human story about the absolute capacity for personal redemption. We'll be pulling directly from our source text, The Sword Laid Down, Ashoka's Path to Peace, to see exactly how this radical shift actually happened. Okay, let's dive into this. Can a ruthless conqueror ever truly change? I mean, that's the central mystery we're unpacking here. We so often think of history as being rigidly set in stone, you know? We look back at historical figures and label them. They're either the undeniable hero or the clear-cut villain. But what happens when the very architect of immense suffering completely rewrites his own script? How does someone go from being entirely defined by the sword to just laying that sword down completely? That is the dramatic redemption arc we're going to explore today.
So let's set the stage with part one, the formidable conqueror. Look, every great redemption story has to show us what the protagonist is actually redeeming themselves from. For Ashoka, his early reign was entirely defined by aggressive expansion. Just think about the psychology behind that for a second. This was a leader whose entire initial persona, his whole metric for personal and political success, was rooted in this relentless, almost mechanical drive for territory. Success was literally measured by conquest. It was measured by pushing borders further and further outward, entirely through force. There was no hesitation, and there was absolutely no room for peace in this early chapter. His rule was all about taking, expanding, and winning, no matter the cost.
Let's move to part two and see how this builds. We arrive at the Kalinga Cataclysm.
This is it. This is the turning point. The devastating inciting incident that completely shattered the worldview of our formidable conqueror, the Kalinga War. Our source text describes it as a devastating conflict culminating in immense loss of life. I want us to just pause and really sit with that for a moment. Immense loss of life. This wasn't just some standard military engagement to add another line to a map. It was a staggering human tragedy. That aggressive expansion we were just talking about, it hit its absolute, brutal peak right here. The sheer scale of the devastation was unparalleled, and suddenly, the true, horrifying human cost of Ashoka's ambition was laid completely bare in front of him.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful quote, straight from our source. It says he was, quote, deeply affected by the harrowing sights of the battlefield. Those words are absolutely crucial. Harrowing sights. This wasn't a sanitized casualty report read from the comfort of a distant palace. He was there, and he was deeply, personally rattled by the grim reality of what he had done. This was the exact moment a profound internal crisis of conscience was sparked. The ultimate victor looked out at his ultimate victory and realized it was actually a nightmare. And this brilliantly illustrates the complete trajectory of the dramatic redemption triggered by that cataclysm. You see how aggressive expansion leads directly to that harrowing battlefield. But, and here is the incredible part, instead of doubling down on the violence to justify the cost, that horror acts as a catalyst for a profound spiritual transformation. A transformation that ultimately ushers in an era of peace. This isn't just a basic timeline of ancient events, it's literally a map of a man's soul completely rewiring itself in real time.
That brings us right into part three, a spiritual transformation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer, stark contrast. Having witnessed the ultimate cost of his aggression, Ashoka steps out of the dark and enters the third act of his life. We're watching an internal revolution happen. His old compass was entirely defined by violent warfare, but he completely abandons that, just drops it, in favor of a brand new compass guided by Buddhist principles and peace. This wasn't some minor PR pivot or a small policy shift. This was a total 180-degree rejection of the very foundation his early empire was built on. He literally traded the sword for compassion. But you know, a true redemption arc requires actual action, right? You can't just feel bad, you have to do something about it. So how did he actually walk this path? As our sources detail, Ashoka's path of atonement involved highly tangible steps. First, he actively abandoned violent warfare. He just shut down the machinery of conquest. Second, he adopted Buddhist principles, fundamentally overhauling his internal belief system. And third, he created these massive pillars and inscriptions. He basically took all that relentless energy he used to pour into conquering neighboring lands and channeled it directly into creating lasting monuments to his new worldview.
And what exactly was written on those pillars? He dedicated his immense power to spreading messages of nonviolence, morality, and compassion. Look, these inscriptions weren't vanity projects. They weren't giant statues meant to stroke his ego. They were a dedicated, monumental effort to permanently embed nonviolence into the very fabric of his society's daily life. It's like he wanted to guarantee that the harrowing sights of Kalinga would never, ever be repeated, using his vast authority to essentially mandate empathy.
And that leads us to our final chapter, Part 4, The Legacy of Empathy. We've traced this unbelievable journey from an aggressive expansionist to a leader whose whole platform was spreading compassion. So what does this ancient story leave behind for us right now? So the crucial point is captured perfectly in this final observation from our source. True strength is found in empathy rather than military victory. This right here is the ultimate lesson of Ashoka's life. I mean, think about it. He reached the absolute pinnacle of military victory. He conquered basically everything in his path. And when he got to the top, he realized it was entirely hollow. He realized it was actually a profound kind of weakness. He discovered and then spent the rest of his life teaching the world that true, lasting strength actually requires the courage to be empathetic. Which leaves us with this final thought to really chew on. In your own life, do you measure your strength by your conquests or by your empathy? Obviously, we aren't emperors commanding vast ancient armies, but we all have our own forms of aggressive expansion, don't we? We all have those moments where we prioritize winning an argument over actually understanding the other person. Emperor Ashoka's incredible story proves that the most profound, lasting change doesn't come from defeating everyone around us. It comes from conquering our own aggression. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.